Welcome everyone. So let me go to speaker view to record that. So this is the first session for the planning of the social ledger, the next generation social ledger, version 2.0 if you want. So the idea is, I've prepared a couple of slides. I'll step you through the slides, and I just wanted to get your feedback and some initial responses to that. What makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Is it the right direction? Should we go in another direction? Just some thoughts I have on the social ledger too. So this doesn't go into an implementation right away. So this is a slow design process, a co-created design process, really, where I want to involve as many people as possible and see where we can take this. Hey, Robert.
Hello.
Cool. We're recording this, Robert, so feel free to share this also after the thing is over. And I just talked a little bit about the purpose of this meeting here is to just go over some of these raw design concepts I put together in this slide deck that I'll share in a moment, and then capture some of your responses to that. Right? See what do you think makes sense? Where you think we should take this even further. If that's not radical enough, it's not out of out of the world. If we should move this to another space or place, let me know. Right? So jump in at any point, and we can expand that.
Yeah, let me give a little context. What Joachim is presenting today is essentially a replacement for the dashboard, where we'll have access to all the capabilities of the social ledger from a user interface. And we're not really getting into any of the back-end things. We're not getting into the language of social objects, the domain-specific language that will be used to control these objects, like we do with the dig/dig command today, or the agent behaviors. The agents behind the social objects that we can orchestrate.
That's right, Jim. That's helpful. So the focus really today is more on the front end here. I want to give you an idea of a possible interface into the social ledger, right? And from that we can derive, I think, more easily what the backend is going to look like and the integration and the functionality of it. Okay, so let me jump right into the presentation here. Okay, sharing this. Let me see if I can go to presentation mode. All right, do you all see the title slide? Yep. Okay, good. Let me see one here of you on the side. Let me see.
Okay. Yes, I see it.
Great. Yeah, now I see all. All right, so Social Ledger 2. A couple of introductory slides. If you haven't seen this, I suggest you click on this little video here, with a scene from Interstellar, which I like very much, the travel into the night and trying to figure out a way through this as a team effort, as you can see here in the Lego version of that. I think, Gary, you've seen the video clip I shared there too, right? So this is a co-creation, collaborative experience here, right? So I don't want to create this on my own, and I want to get input from as many people as possible, and then also, distribute that to as many developers as who are interested in this project. Meaning we need to compartmentalize or componentize this as much as possible. So there could be multiple streams, multiple parallel streams of adding to this project, and it can start with a small set of functions, and then it could expand from there. That would be my ideal development path for this. But so let's see what's behind that. Let's skip this slide. This basically says the same thing what I said in the introduction, and sort of a pathway to all of the things we wanted to touch upon. First of all, revisiting the current social ledger, what we did so far. What have we learned? What are the core patterns in that? And where do we see the value today? And then where do we see the value of it tomorrow, right? So that's the co-creation piece of the next generation ledger. Let me see if I can turn on this pointer thingy. You see my laser pointer? Good. So how we want to do this? So I'm planning to do a series of Zoom sessions, probably on Tuesdays and Thursdays, starting today, with a break in between over the holidays, of course. And then break this down into a couple of sessions here. So a session around revisiting what we've seen, what we've learned so far, beginning today, right? Then getting into an overall design architecture study for a few weeks. Designing some more wireframing, prototyping the interface, and then thinking about the components, the different modules, the orchestration, as Jim likes to put that too. So what's going on behind the scenes. And then, of course, the backend storage, and I'm calling it Lambda functions here, but functions that operate in the backend itself. So you put something in there, and then something else is triggered based on that information. And to Jim's point also, I want to keep that as abstract as possible. So if we're using Firebase 2 in this version, there might be a holochain in the next version, or an R-chain integration. So the backend should really be abstracted as much as possible, and replaceable, so we can use it with multiple backends. That would be the ideal design philosophy behind that. Okay, and then once we get to a point where this is it, we can start working on it. So let's find some developers to get working on that stuff. Could be myself starting to work on the initial components, modules. Could be anyone who's interested to write other modules and components. All right. Why we're doing this? Here, quick slide. I think these are a couple of important points here. So first of all, the scope of the social ledger has changed a lot. So initially, if you go back to the very first days, the idea was to create sort of a small tool to record some membership activities. Right, so instead of putting it in a spreadsheet, we wanted to put it into a ledger type thing, and say, okay, I'm a member now of this particular circle, and here's my role, and here's my level of expertise, right? And then it came to, okay, let's link to some important objects that show up in these discussions, so they don't float by in the activity stream. And store that somewhere. So out of this came really the notion of, hey, this is a ledger that applies to a lot of different environments and contexts, and recently a lot of different collectives, right? And this is the fascinating part to me, that we draw in other people from other collectives, and they have an obvious lead too to provide some services to their own group of people that they put together, and their own teams that they're building, stuff together. So the scope has changed really of the social ledger. That's why a redesign, a rethinking of it would be a good thing to do now. There's also an opportunity to take an active leadership role here to support this trend, right? That's an article here written on Digital Life, talking about the line in the sand, so basically saying, moving into the other side of the fence, where we offer new cooperative services, new relationship-based systems that break out of the centralized, extractive economy model, right? So here's an example of where we can do that. Digital Life does that, and we can piggyback on that notion of, hey, here's a good system for you to use and to pull your users into that side of the fence. And then we're still talking about business models at the Digital Life Collective. So here could be a possible one that I can see where we can offer something to members, non-members, people who are part of the collective or not, and invest their time and money in, right? So that's a notion forward here. The cost of entry is really low. Starting from the hundreds here, I'm talking about. It'll go up with the thousands and the 10,000s, of course, but we're not there yet. So with low entry costs, we can get started right away, and that's the stuff that Jim's already doing with a lot of the collectives and communities that he's setting up now in Mattermost. Then I also find that there's still, there's a large gap between the newcomers and those who have worked in the social ledger for a while. So the notion of a newcomer here is someone who's really not familiar with this technology. And that could even be that they haven't seen a Mattermost before, or they have used Slack in the past, and now they're introduced to another chat tool like Mattermost because they don't want to afford this anymore. They don't want to support that. So the newcomers coming from all directions. And I think the second version of the social ledger needs to start with that notion, with that thought in mind that a lot of people haven't really worked in these kind of environments. And we want to introduce these services step by step and very slowly, and introduce the protocols that come along with these services step by step. And the last point is, the typical pattern I see here since started using the social ledger is there's usually typically a single person who's really taking a lead role here and says, I want to get something going. Let me initiate a project. And that person wants to set up, control a lot of the initial pieces, and then invite the other people into that circle. So that kind of pattern, I think, is important for the design of the next stage. So that a single person can actually prepare something, and it's very easy, very low barrier to entry for other people who then come on board and want to support that idea, that project, whatever it is, right? Okay. Any questions so far? Feel free to jump in. This was just my prologue here. Now we're getting really started.
I would just say, reiterate the point that the typing commands is not is against the grain for many users, and really we needed to focus on a dashboard or some other interface that people would be more attracted to.
Yes, thanks, Jim. That's a perfect segue into my next set of slides, which is looking at the front end. So dashboards, right? One of the things I've been using with the social ledger is the dashboard, right? That shows the organizational elements there, and then you can drill down and then go into the channel and then go into the social objects within the channel. So the concept of dashboard is widely, familiar around users out there. You see it in all different places. And also, by the way, here, I just wanted to show that to Jim earlier. Card-based interfaces. I'm a big fan of method cards. I've done a lot of stuff with method cards in the past, where you sort of introduce or inject ideas. Oh, wrong direction. Ideas into a conversation, and then people pick up on these ideas and they do something with it, and they have certain value or a difficulty level or some kind of a number assigned to that. So this to me is a very interesting notion of gamification of a process, right? So this doesn't go into, you get a pretty badge, assigned to you, or a score that tells you, whoa, you're a leader here. This is more a natural way, I think, to say, hey, we're familiar with these cards, and there's a natural tension towards, let me find out, let me click on a card, let me start collecting cards, right? Let me organize cards in different ways, let me filter those and work with these cards. So that notion of gamification aspect, I wanted to bring this into the preliminary design here for the social ledger too. So the card-based interface, right? I have a couple of examples here. Here's another one from a website, and you can see here these typical filters you see there, right? By project, here in this example, who's featured, location, all kinds of filters that you can apply to that with a small card, and then it has some attributes, the data, the metadata that's stored along with the card. is always present, on the card itself, and you can do something. You can click on it, or you can click on something else, and it gives you more metadata, more information. So that's an important aspect of these these card-based interfaces. Here's another one, and notice here at the bottom of these cards is a series of small avatars, right, of people who probably like that card, right? Something that would align well with our thinking of, hell, we have team members, for certain channels, or committed to certain activities. Well, they could also show as part of this card here. All right, so this is, here, you like that, Robert. So you guys also have used a nice card interface inside your MetaMaps environment, right? Where you can click on any of these nodes, and then it gives you more information of the nodes. So that's just to say that it shows up in many different places, and it's such a familiar interface design object that we should really leverage that. And it also works nice on mobile devices, right? So you can pull it up in a mobile device and then flip through it very quickly. And point to it, and then you get to the next level or open that corresponding application. So cards are interesting. They also, here's, don't know if you've seen that. So here's an augmented reality version of cards, which I found interesting because this doesn't go into, well, let me stop this. Sorry, go back. An augmented reality version, which keeps sort of the 2D into 3D shift. If we assume at some point we'll have a way, as in this video, you can just pull up your phone and then you overlay that in a real environment, or you get some goggles and then you can look around and just point and click to that and then reorganize the cards. To me it's like a very convenient interface to sit back and see what activities are out there and what's happening currently with your engagements. And that's one promising way I see for an augmented reality interface. But that can be overlaid with other things too, so, and also with other presentation modes, like the Holonic interface with the Holonic chart, right? You could see that as a three-dimensional thing, and you can walk into it, and you can point and click to, certain circles, and then zoom into that circle that way. Or it could be a 3D, like a globe spinning in the air, and then you can point and then open and zoom into deeper circles. So there's just many options, and that could apply to a three-dimensional way of displaying this two-dimensional data. But let's take a look at the card itself now, because that's now the core piece. On the left side, you see the generic social object as a card. Okay, so and I'm using this crystal here as an icon to represent a social object, because to me a crystal is like something you look into. It's like a kind of transparent, but it contains a lot of information, and the content actually is not inside the social object, in the card. It's where you click and link to it. So you see the pointer here. The current version of the social ledger is a simple link to the object that's housed inside a tool, right? So if it's a Google document, that's a link to the Google document. So the tool here is a Google Drive with a doc or a sheet, whatever tool we're using, right? And so we're leveraging that idea of point and click and get to the content of the card. And we're also saying, the access control is around the tool itself, so that protects the content, right? So if you restrict access to a Google Drive, then you can't get to it anymore, even though you can see the social object on the card, but you can't open it because you don't have access to it, right? And the other thing is we wanted to sort of align the address of the card, and by address I mean, you see over here, domain, channel, and object, right? 3 levels. Again, this is the current situation. We don't have the top level collective in the address yet. But if you have the domain, channel, and object, then that should map to a namespace inside the tool. So going back to the Google Drive example, that would mean, we want to structure our file system, along the same way that we structure the address space here. And that's something we're doing now actually in the Digital Life Collective. So slowly moving our Google Drive towards the same structure that we see in Mattermost, which is hopefully easier to navigate back and forth and find stuff in these spaces. So again, that's the current situation. The CID stands for create, read, and delete. So there is no update, you notice, right? The typical CRUD is you have these 4 basic operations, right? The creation of an object, the reading and the deleting and the updating of an object. Updating, I haven't implemented that yet. Maybe we'll do that before this version, but it's certainly a part of the next generation social ledger. So let's take a look at that. This is another example. Right, so here's a Mattermost post, let's say, that has an ID. That's the card with the link to the object in Mattermost, right? So you would get into the Mattermost tool environment, you authenticate through Mattermost, and you'll find the same address, which is the corresponding channel, right, in Mattermost, and you can see the post. Actually, it's highlighting that post, in case you have, like what I do is oftentimes create an implementation plan or some outline in Mattermost itself using the Markdown language, and then that's the thing I'm pointing to in the social ledger, right? So that's the example. But okay, let's take a look at the future. So how would that look like in a more advanced state? So what I'm saying here is, again, there's a social object card, and there's the data, and then there's an additional thing called the behavior. So this card suddenly has some level of intelligence, right? So see it as not only a 2-dimensional thing here that has some information, and you can click on that and it brings you somewhere, but it has some intelligence in it. And by intelligence, I mean it is extracting information through different kinds of interfaces and adds that information to the card itself, right? So these interfaces are obviously the APIs right now. They're software development kits, they're bots, they're plugins, webhooks. So all kinds of interfaces that we can utilize to bring that information into the card, right? That's one step. And the other thing is, see on the right side, you see there's not only the tool now and the content where it's displayed inside the tool, but there's also a protocol around that. And by protocol is, I mean, so what is allowed to do here, or what is a recommended way? What's some guideline to use that social object in this tool environment, right? So help users to set the boundaries really for initiating an action on that social object. So that to me is an important piece, because we see protocols all over the place, right? Like Graham recently had difficulty setting up his profile in Ghost, right? So we could have a card for that, say, okay, setting up your profile, the tool is Ghost, right? And the protocol is, okay, you have to create your account in Ghost, and then you go through these 2 steps to find your account profile and fill in your details, add your avatar, and save that thing. So that kind of protocol comes along with that step of setting up a profile on the website, as one example here. But to me, this notion now goes into, you see the arrow goes in 2 directions, and that's very important. So through the API integration, we can figure out, extract some important data elements that are now pulled into the social object card, and it can then use that information to change its behavior, right? So it can say, because I've learned that you are, you have an account, let's say in Ghost, cool, then you can take that next step and create your profile because you have an account. And it can learn that you don't have an account in Ghost. So it would change its behavior and say, okay, then you have to do that first, right? So here's the first step is, well, go in there and create your account. Here's how you do that. And that kind of behavior is easily extracted from these API calls and other ways to extract the information. And then so the data is also richer in this case. That means, besides the address information, descriptor, and some metrics, and the actors who attach to that, we can also store the history. Sort of where did it get used? How often did it get used? Who was part of the uses when that card was activated? And I get into that into the next slide, right? By tool, I mean the data that is pulled in, like a status that we can extract out of a tool that we're using, and I'll show you that in an example that's easier to grasp there. And let me see, the protocol I talked about and the behaviors I talked about. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of the future version of the digital ledger card-based interface. But let's drill down further. And what I wanted to do here is use an example for that. And this is a very simple example. I could go way more complex than that, but I just wanted to keep it simple for now so kind of get the idea of out there to see what kind of intelligence can we add into a social ledger card. So here the example is around Zoom, right? So Zoom is our video conferencing tool. And if we were to use Zoom as one of the cards we use in the deck here, it could then extract certain information from an ongoing session. Let's say somebody scheduled a session and then the card would know, okay, that session is in progress, right? And it knows that because this is the context. The card only shows in the context where you are, right? In your channel, in your circle, in your work team. And that's where you work and that's where you start these, let's say, video conference call. So it would know that context and it would know who's involved in that space. And it can then show, okay, this is in progress. And I know you have an account in Zoom. I know you are part of the team. I offer you the join activity, right? So it's a simple button that says, I'm going to join this Zoom call. So that's a simple, could be as simple as a link here that you always click when you open the Zoom session with the Zoom ID, right? And it brings it to the tool, and it has the video conference protocol attached to that. And the way I wanted to do that, let me show that in the next couple of slides. But so this is the Zoom session card. If you zoom, if you zoom out, sorry, zooming out and see, okay, if that's one card, are there any other cards that we could create here? So there are a whole bunch of cards we could actually do, and they can be organized around type of content, like a card for, let's say, the second one here, meeting agenda. We already do that with Google Docs, right? So why not having a card for Google Docs that has some kind of an action? And that's just a generic term here. That action is specific to what you can do to that object. In that case, the Google Doc. What can you do to that Google Doc? And you can click on that, and it opens the doc, and then you can start editing it, whatever, right? Could be another one for recordings. Could be another, so Zoom sessions is a second one here. That means we want to show the history of how you have used the cards. And you can actually do that just by instantiating a session, right? So there may be one, the first card here is the most recent one, which shows, hey, there's a Zoom session in progress. And the action will be, let me join that session, right? And then here's the corresponding meeting agenda that is part of this meeting we want to hold. But if you go back to the right, so this goes back to the sort of history of all of the transactions that have happened here in this space. So you can see there's another Zoom session that has happened in the past. It's completed, and there's a certain action attached to that. And I'll show you what that action could look like in the next screen. There could be a project plan we're working on, design documents, outlines, whatever it is, happening sort of in the past. And as soon as they update it, they would move again back to the front of the queue, indicating that this is an active object that people are working on. So other cards could be, I have a Lumio decision card here. So that means for a specific decision inside Lumio, we can take a certain action and say, this could be part of a decision-making process, that kind of card. Or another one is a bookmarking tool, like Wallaback is a good one, where we can say, okay, here's an action that user took, and say they have added another link to the collection of links that we sort of gather for this particular workspace we're in. And because it's connected to some API with the Wallaback tool, it could extract some information and extend that into behavior that we see on the card, right? Again, so I'm calling this history because, again, this is all the instantiated cards and reactivated cards that are being used in the current workspace environment, right? And you can go back and back and back. So this gray card here indicates you can go back in history until the very first instance of the first card that was created. And how would that look like? If you go back to the beginning of a creation of a space, this is this funny GIF here. So the social object as sort of a genesis effect. I mentioned that I think earlier. So starting from scratch, starting from nothing, right, comes something, and you put in you activate a social object with some data, and you click on that, and then something happens, right? So you can instantiate a session, you can create add a new tool to your repertoire there, whatever. The idea is, out of this nothing comes something, and it really is an emerging process here. I'm not saying, some things we've done in the past is sort of predefine the whole structure, right? Say, how does that stuff look like? Here's your slot, here's your role, here's the activities, go do it, right? And then find members to do that. This is kind of the opposite direction here. It's saying we just offer them a set of cards, right? So there's it could be like as simple as there's a starter deck of cards. They can open that, and they can see, okay, there's a card for Lumio, there's a card for Mattermost in there. Let's instantiate these objects and see what happens, right? And out of this instantiation, as simple as clicking that and getting some access rights and creating this thing in the back end, people see how this unfolds suddenly, right? So out of nothing suddenly comes something. There's a space. There's a decision process, right? They just unfold that, and then they begin working in that space. So to me, this is a very cool onboarding process, right? Because you don't have to learn anything, basically. You can start with a single card and say, we'll do conversations in a Slack channel first, for example. And that's all we do. And that's the card, and that's what everybody can follow, and that's what happens. And then over time, we can start adding more cards to that and say, okay, we have more complex decisions to make. We need a better tool. We have to write a newsletter to our members. Let's add a card for that and see how that protocol looks like to send the stuff out. And lots and lots of different varieties of cards I can imagine here to add to this kind of a deck that we could offer. This is a little bit of the context, sort of an expanding context of what we currently see. If you take Mattermost as an example, right? So we have on the left side the domains, the channels, and then the conversation stream here. It sort of expands that space into, well, there's actually collectives in front of this, and then there's services at the back end of that. And services is an important label now that I want to give to social object. And let me show you what I mean by that. Let's go through this one here. That's a simple flow chart to say, okay, where do we begin this process? Step one, I'm using a dotted line here. So there could be some payment to get into this platform, right? So there's a fee or a contribution or donation, whatever it is. Then this is very similar to the membership process we have right now. And then you get into a login registration state. And this is kind of a new thing. And Jim, you've been elaborating on this a lot. The Social Ledger 2 needs to create your own ID, okay? Sort of, hopefully, a kind of distributed ID. But it's the thing that identifies you, okay? From that point on, you have a registered, name and ID in our system, and then we can hook much better into the different behaviors of the cards that we can show to you, right? Because now I know who you are. Let me show you what you can do in this context. We sort of have this now with MetaMost, because we use MetaMost as the webhook, and then you click on a link, and it gives you, let's say, you jump to the dashboard. That works because now the dashboard knows where you came from and who you are, but it doesn't it doesn't authenticate you, right? That whole piece is missing, and that needs to be upfront here, obviously, in the next generation. So, an authentication of who you are. Ideally, also that all of the applications that we attach to this world will authenticate through the same process, right? And I know, Jim, you know a lot more about this. How we can have the applications authenticate against.
We have to collect your GitHub identity and your identity on this and that system. Anything that's connected to this, we want to aggregate identities so that you have a single sign-on to all the tools that you're using here, or that are accessed through here, where tokens are kept in your browser and or encrypted, and you can seamlessly go through all the tools you use with different logins, and it knows who you are, so that it can use your permissions to access the tools or the services.
That's right, Jim. No, that would be the ideal case, and it's an important component here. So let's step through the boxes here a bit. So let's assume you have logged in and I know who you are. Sorry about this noise here. I hate these commercial phone calls, leaving messages. Okay, so you step through this, and you get to the top level of the quote-unquote dashboard here, right? Where you see a list of all the different collectives here, and you can click on any of them. So there's a whole list of collectives, cards, for collectives, and then you can get to the next level, which I call circle here. So circle sort of encompasses the notion of the address space. So there's the domain and there's the channel that describes where that circle is located. And then the next level is, this is where I'm changing my mind now on not calling it social object anymore, because to me this is more related to a service. So you can add a service to your circle and you can do something, and then there's certain activities you can run on these services, which very much aligns with the notion of, hey, that's the social object definition right there. It's an object, and you can act on that. You can do something with it, and it records your activities that you do to it. And if we take that a step further and say, hey, these services come from certain tools we're adding to this mix here. They're provided by these tools that we add to the mix. Well, perfect. That's exactly the notion of a service you can add to your information landscape, to your work team environment. Okay, so that's the flow chart. Oh, here's another interstellar thingy. If you're into that, that's the Tesseract scene in the background, right?
I have a comment, if I can interrupt, on the last slide.
Oh, okay. Let me go back.
And I guess I should have asked before, but we have another level of organization in terms of within the circle we have activities, and the activities can have a membership of services. The circle can have. So there's another level in there, and I think that we would be better calling these agents than services. We really have a social object, which is really just metadata. It doesn't do anything. It accesses other services. But it acts as an agent in terms of its computational model and the communication model. And it can be a user agent or a group agent or really the object has its own agent, which gives it agency, so to speak.
That's another good one. That's another Jim Scarver one. Let me write this down. From agent to agency. Cool. Yeah. We have to, incorporate that thinking into this model here. I'm not there yet, but we'll find a way. Right? So this is the Tesseract scene in the movie Interstellar. This is just to say, here's a social object, and there are all these strings, right? Flows of data that go in and out. And I'm saying they kind of span space and time because they're different locations and they have different address spaces, and they happen at different times, chronological time here. And all this kind of information, that feeds into the social object, that comes from this either distributed or centralized, whatever database backend that we have that is connected to these books here. These are, I call it bookshelves, right? So the bookshelves, see them as that's where the content resides, right? That's the context, and that's where the tool also is. What kind of tool we're using, be that maps, cards, grids, pandas, that's specific to data science, tasks, links, graphs, docs, all these different types of books we have on the shelf there with the content. It all feeds into this notion of an intelligent card here that can become your deck, your personal play deck that you use to move your team, your group forward to whatever goal you're setting up.
Where's the conversation?
The conversations happened, let's say one of the books here is about the conversation itself, right? You go to that, it brings you into that space, and you have your conversation there. It's just one of the different methods we use for the card, right? So a conversation, a text-based conversation is a good thing for a MetaMost tool, right? A visualization of a graph that multiple people can edit, is a good thing for Google presentation or some other graphing whiteboarding tool that you have, right? These are all kind of expressions of how do we move our thinking forward together. So these card decks really serve different purposes, right? And they provide. Here's a new thing I wanted to introduce here. I just came up with that this morning and yesterday. So there are different levels of value that these cards provide, right? See this little number here on the corner, and this is just an arbitrary, method card deck here. But there's a number here, so we can actually take that number and think a little bit further of if that represents a value, right, of a card. What does it mean in this case, right? What does it mean if we play a card with a value in a social ledger, beat game? And that's what I wanted to drill down in the following slides. Before we do that, here's another one that shows, well, a card is actually front, and the back side. And we could use the back side of the card as a way to describe a protocol. That goes back to, I think, Mike, you had at some point said, we want to take notes on these things, right? So let me write something about this card. This would be a way to say, hey, yeah, you can actually do that. It's part of the metadata of the card, and you just add set the protocols in text form there, and people can flip it around and then read it. Simple as that. So let me go through a scenario here to make that even more visual, and how this could look like. Here are a couple of steps that are along the flowchart you saw earlier. So there's some kind of a login or registration to get your ID, right? This is the first level of the dashboard. And then you get to see a screen where you can add a new collective, right? So we would send people right to that screen. We say, okay, you sign up here, get your DID, and then you create your own collective if you have one, right? Say you have a group of 50 people, they want to join this social ledger trial. Add your collective, add the metadata, and here's the notion I'm playing around with. A collective can have its own currency, right? Whatever that is, whatever they use to express their value, declare that. Say, okay, here's the currency they're using, here's the purpose, and here's where you guys are maybe located, right? And that triggers a new card, right? So suddenly a new card shows up, like the S7 guys. Here's the S7 card. They're using a certain currency. Here's their purpose of why they're doing that, and here's where they operate. And then you go next level down, which is, okay, let me add a circle to that. And by circle, we mean, so circle can have a budget, has a certain goal, and their team members attached to the circle. So declare that. And then select one of the top-level domains. And to me, the notion of domain, I think, boils down to 3 or 4 main domains that are sort of generic across all these different collectives that we are targeting. One is operations. That's the obvious one, right? To run your thing, whatever it is, to break it down into some of these typical functional lines, the marketing piece, legal, the HR, whatever you need. An operations domain, a practices domain, where you see experts working in certain topical areas, right? And or projects domain, right, where it's more specific to, hey, let's build something here to help us move this collective forward. So a simple project. Or what I'm doing now with John Kelton's conversation community, they're kind of looking into participative journalism, investigative journalism, and they're creating stories collectively. So this could be a domain for setting up stories. So bring people into a story domain, and then each channel is then its own story that they're working on. So again, then a card appears, and you can then click another level down, which is to add a service, right? So I'm calling the service here. We have to reconcile this with the notion of an agent here, really. But let's work with the service for now, because what that means is, so you can create a new service, and then there's a value. Why would you do this? You want to move your group forward, so can you attach a value to that, an attractor to say, hey, I'm participating here, I'm adding value, right? And here's a way to do that. And then the activity itself, right? So you create a new service, what kind of activities can we do within that scope of the service? And the efficacy level, that's based on who you are, the calculation of who you are and what role you play, and what expertise you have, what level of expertise you have, that determines your contribution to that kind of service. And again, so a new card appears, and you can select from sort of a different set of standard services we could provide, and then they can be expanded by other people or other developers or whoever plays a part in this, right? So to the last one, let's take a look at that service thing, right? So I'm calling this service request here. And what that means is we could provide a set of standard services based on our infrastructure, right? Based on, let's say we have Cloudron, and we can load Lumio, MetaMost, and Zoom, or some other video conferencing tool on that platform, so we can easily control and expand that. And here are 4 services we would offer to anyone who joins the social ledger. All right, so the obvious one, let's say a video conferencing tool would be Zoom, right? And notice there's a number now in the upper right here, which I call a value indicator. So in order to activate Zoom, which is currently not installed, right? It knows that because of the context and because of who you are. You can actually initiate an action, which is requesting the service, right? What I'm saying here, it could be as simple as giving a negative value to that. So initiating that service would cost you 1,000, whatever currency it is, right? So just to get it up and running for you. So for us, for the people who own the platform, that would mean, or who are on the administrative side of the platform, they would have to, let's say, create a new account, pay some membership dues for setting up Zoom somewhere, right? So that could be the request behind that button. But once you have that, then you have added that service, and you can now use Zoom video conferences anytime you want for your circle that you've set it up for, right? So similar with MetaMost, right? So you want a MetaMost service, say that could be creating a new, putting your collective into a domain of an existing instance of MetaMost that we have running, right? So would cost you, say, 100 quids, and you can request that. Or Google Drive, right? So again, assuming you're not so familiar with this stuff, right? And people who know how to set up Google Drive, of course, they will go ahead and set up their drive. But if you have never used that, or you're not so familiar with that, or you used Microsoft Office before, whoa, what's Google Drive, right? So we can, again, help to instantiate setting up a Google Drive for that particular collective, right? And it costs, whatever, we indicate here, and they have that service up and running. And similar to Loomio, right? So this will be the instantiating step, so the first to actually add that kind of service to your world, right? So it wouldn't exist before, and now it is available to anyone who is part of that particular collective, right? So if we take this one level down, so here's I call this a story sequence. So what would happen? Let's say if we instantiated Zoom. So here's the Zoom card, right? It becomes available, and you can then say, okay, we want to have a Zoom session. We do that repeatedly, or we do this every once in a while. And the current state is not scheduled, and you can click on this button and then you schedule something. So this could be metadata that's either pulled out of Zoom directly via the API call to say, okay, here's the schedule, here's the time slot that's currently available, go ahead and schedule it, right? Once you do that, this card now changes because it has learned now, okay, there's a schedule that we want to set up, here it is, right? So it then can show you, okay, in 4 hours, again, that's my view on this card, right? So it knows my time zone and knows where I am. So in 4 hours, which is December 4th, at this time, is a Zoom session, right? And once we reach that point, you can launch it and then jump directly into the Zoom session. And from there, say we are now at this point in time, so it switches again, because it knows, okay, now the Zoom session is in progress, and then it can actually know who is inside the Zoom session, right? List the members here, and I can join that Zoom session, right? Whether I was invited or not is up to the team, right? If it's open or private, but I could join here. And the next stage is, okay, well, at some point it's going to end, and there's a protocol that says, hey, we wanted to record everything in our meetings. So that goes to a certain location. Let's say it goes to a Google Drive location, what we're doing now with the Digital Life Collective, right? It goes to a certain place, and here's the recording. And you can click that button, which just opens up this recording, and you can view it as a YouTube video, for example, right? So it's a sequence of steps here that's kind of unfold over time for one particular thing, service, which is the Zoom video conferencing call, right? So out of this little thing, you can already see how much metadata you can extract out of this, and the value you provide. So let's take a look at this value indicator on the upper right. So if I assume I paid the 1,000 quids to set it up, right? So I have it available. It's about, the current balance is 0, right? Now let's say, okay, I want to set up a Zoom session. I want these 4 people inside that Zoom session. It's important to me that you all participate and see what's going on. What we could do is, calculate a value that says, okay, the owner of the card says this is worth 100 coins to me, right? So 100 is the value I put into that Zoom session. And me as a participant, I could then compute, okay, if I participate, I will earn 20 coins, as an example, right? So the moment I click on, say, the join button here, that can be the trigger to say, okay, I'm earning 20 coins, because I simply participated. That's evidence enough to say I really participated in the Zoom session, right? So I get the 20, and the total is also kind of a remaining balance indicator, goes down to 0, assuming everybody who was invited actually showed up and went to the meeting. So the full value was realized of putting in 100, everybody showed up, and they got their coins, done, right? And we can move on to the next Zoom session. So this is a little bit different thinking of the commitment levels that we had before, that we currently have, right? Not sure how to reconcile the two. I do begin to like more and more the more explicit side of assigning value to things, and then you click on something, do something, and then you get that value, or you add that value because you participate, because you do things. And that can be applied to any of these cards, right? So notice these are stacked here. So another thing I'm thinking to do is they're related cards. So obviously with a Zoom session comes a meeting agenda. You store your meeting information somewhere, right? And that's just simply a second card that's kind of attached to that, where you can click on this, and then you see information on that card, and it opens up the meeting agenda, whatever form you use to store the meeting notes in there, right? A Google Doc or some other tool. So attached to that, and they show together, right, on the screen, and you can flip back and forth. And this could be expanded and say, okay, at some point in this Zoom session, we decided to make a decision using the Lumio tool. So that simply becomes another card here that you can use, attach it to this, and you use that to say, okay, I've now contributed to that decision, which could have its own value attached to that, right? So there's a lot of currency flow suddenly initiated here just by looking at cards and then clicking on an activity, because you're actually authorized to work at this space, so it's okay. And then you actually do something, so that is enough proof to say, hey, I've contributed to the Lumio decision, or I've worked on the meeting agenda with you guys, and I can earn some coins, whatever that means, right? That's still an open-ended discussion. But so that's the story sequence. The protocol, I mentioned earlier. So there's a backside of a card, as simple as flipping a card around, and it shows you on the back of the card what this actually is, right? And some of the protocols around using Zoom. And this is just textual, could be just a simple explanation, but it could also be more of a rule-based stuff. And maybe that goes into the agent-based model, Jim, right? Where an agent can actually control, what's allowed here and what's not allowed. And it gives you feedback on, yes, you can do that with Zoom. No, you cannot do that with Zoom, right? And constrains sort of the activities further if you want to put that into the protocol, right?
Yeah, what we're developing is a ChatOps protocol where, from Mattermost or IRC or anywhere, you can type a command to control all your resources and all your bots and your personal agents, whatever. These commands that you can use to affect, the objects you own, work anywhere the social ledger is active or integrated, and provide a context or are in the context of where you are, and they may be defined in the behavior and the metadata. So, I envision these cards of having a pull down of all the different things you can do with the card. And then when you hover over one of the operations you can do, it shows you all the parameters that it takes. And these translate directly to the APIs that we're using for our bots on the network.
That's great, Jim. Yep. Good. So, Michael, I know you have a hard stop here, right? I don't know. I want to
go.
Yeah.
Just wanted to comment upon the color coordination of today. There's a lot of red on the screen. I think that's probably significant.
Okay.
That was great, actually, Jochen. That really clarified, laid out the map, gives us a great starting point, I think, for continuing the evolution. And I will catch up on the rest of this video later. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thanks, Micah. Talk later. Alrighty, so others who have it's not much more here, actually. Let me just complete this deck. Here's a more detailed calculation of this value number here. Giving a simple example. Say there's an overall circle budget of 10,000. And that could be set by a parent circle. We can then assign a card value of say 100 to this particular card. So meaning Zoom sessions typically are rewarded with 100 coins. And that's set by the card owner. So whoever sets up that meeting will have the ability to set this value of the card. And there might be some default, some recommended value that you want to use. But essentially, you sort of learn over time what's the meaningful value here. You don't want to make it too much. You want to make it too little. But there's some rewards that you gain just by playing with that value. And then the value add that you provide is calculated based on, say, some baseline 10 times a factor of what your role is. And by role, I mean these 4 different roles. We have your link role, your actor role, your guide, and your administrative role, your scribe role. That could have different factorization here. And then the level of expertise you have too, right? So if you enter that Zoom session here, in your guide role with the high level expertise, then your value add will be higher here, right? So this won't be 20, this may be 100, right? Just because you participated in that. And then after the activity is complete, and by complete, I mean with clicking on the join button. So if we assume there's 1 lead and 3 participants, and this with the same role and expertise, we can just compute the transaction here. So 1 times 40 for the lead, and then 3 times for the participants, 20 each, and then comes down to 100. So we would have realized the full value of 100 here, and without asking people to do much here, right? But just using this interface to say, hey, I'm joining the Zoom session through this, by clicking on this button here. And then the moment I do this, I capture the value, right? So I'm recognized that I'm now part of that Zoom session, and obviously ready to provide value in that context, right? And yeah, that's basically it. Let me go back here.
Yeah, I'm not sure anybody will ever agree on the same reward system, but
right.
Many of us are leaning toward now is a very general token exchange system, wherein the metadata, when you define an operation on a social object, you can have a step in there to award tokens based on some calculation. And Joachim gave a good example here of the kind of thing that we need to be able to do, and is probably plenty good for most organizations to use that, as it is. It seems, but we want it to be an evolutionary environment where we can try different things and
That's
see
right.
what works.
Exactly, Jim. That's the idea, right? So you want to keep that evolutionary in terms of what kind of currency do you want to use in that environment, right? What kind of budgeting outline do you have here? And then going down into these social objects. So what kind of value do they provide to help me move forward? Right? And the Zoom session is kind of a bit arbitrary here because, what's the value of someone having, participating in a video call? I mean, it might be, of great value if you want to have a special person in there with a lot of expertise. But I'm seeing this more like you build something together, right? So what are the different building blocks you guys are working on together? The milestones, right? The project plan, the schedule, the sequence, the implementation of whatever software it is, right? And then we can attach a value to that. That's much easier, I'm not saying it's easy actually, because you still have to figure out, okay, this is worth 5,000. What does that mean, right? but there is an attractor suddenly that says, okay, 5,000 something you get by participating, and I'm actually calculating who you are, based on your expertise and your role here, that you'll get that value, and you get that into your own wallet or whatever it is, right? We could attach to this system, immediately attach, a certain crypto wallet, and that's where all of the stuff gets collected. Right? Anyway, I stop here. Maybe we just go around. Just wanted to get some initial impressions. Totally confused, or something makes sense, or something is missing.
That was great, it's awesome. I love it.
Thanks, Jim.
Well done.
Thank you. Let's see, Robert.
Yeah, I really like the card-based aspect of it, because I think to make this to gamify this in some ways very, very interesting to me. So I just thinking of different integrations I've played with before, some different things like the GroupWorks deck and stuff like that. Sometimes it's simple enough just to throw an image into a channel. And if you have a / command to say, hey, give me a GroupWorks deck card, and that pops into the channel, like that's kind of a pretty awesome augmentation just on its own and very simple. So to take that even further is very interesting.
Totally, yeah, that's right, Robert. That's the idea, let's say a GroupWorks deck could be a great tool that the team is using, right, to move the discussion forward. So why not adding that to the mix? And we provide that, and then there's some interface we can use to integrate that into whatever environment you have, be that in a chat environment or somewhere else.
Yeah, the thing I keep coming back to is that the social ledger really just uses other services. It doesn't really do
Exactly.
One
to a task support system or whatever, you're creating a fabric of that brings it into the organization of an activity on a team in an organization, building the group memory, making it visible within the structure of the group. If somebody just plays cards and nobody knows about it, well, it can have value, but it doesn't have persistent value in the organization. And so we're still just building a skeleton, and we're defining social objects, which I still call them social objects, and I don't think I want to get rid of that term.
Okay. Okay, Jim. Yeah.
But that how we play that card is an action, that's a behavior, and after we do a behavior once, because we have the history, we can do it again and again. We can parameterize it. We can make it a process, and we're no longer dependent on technologists to develop our processes or to automate our processes.
Very true. Thanks, Jim. So Gary, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I had one thought about how it sort of brings some of these decision-making tools like Loomio into the environment where they're actually going to make a lot more sense and become real. Because when people gather in these calls and are communicating synchronously, that's really when they want to make these decisions. The text-based asynchronous channels are very poor places to make certain types of decisions. I like that, but I like so many things about it that I'm just going to start bubbling. But I was sold on the social ledger before all this came along. So I guess my question is, how soon can we have it? Do we have to shut down the old social ledger to deploy social ledger 2.0?
I have to leave, guys.
Thanks, Jim.
Governance meeting now.
A what?
Governance meeting. I forgot. See you guys.
Great question, Gary. And to me, that's why I want to make this as modular as possible, right? So we can start with a very limited set of cards, services, agents, whatever you want to call it, right? And provide these services to anybody who wants to come on board. It could be as simple as, hey, we're going to set up MetaMost spaces for you. So there's a single MetaMost card, and you can activate that. What would that mean is, okay, we grant you access to an instance of MetaMost that we host somewhere, right, as a service. That's part of this whole social ledger engagement. And also reaches into, the idea of we provide a hosting service for some of these collectives out there, right, who don't have the capacity or knowledge to set this kind of stuff up. We can do that directly through the social ledger interface, right? So you come in here, you say, introduce yourself, here's a new collective. Okay, and the next step is, okay, I need some services here to get us going, right? And we need a place to have conversations. Great, we have a MetaMost instance we can set up for you. And the moment you do that with the card, it creates a link into, say, a domain in MetaMost, and you can start chatting right away, right? As simple as that. If we follow that logic, right, so very modular, step by step, and then looking at the integrations that are possible through the service that we're using. Like, let's say MetaMost has a great API, and we can now begin to extract some of the information inside the API and show that up on the social object, on the card itself. That's not, to me, a lot of effort, to do that for a particular card. And then you can take the next card, right, and say, okay, what's the next service we want to offer in this environment? Let's say Zoom conferencing call is great, works well, reasonably priced. Let's add that to the mix. Examine what the API looks like for Zoom, right? And then integrate that piece of information into the Zoom card. So we expand that service step by step, right? And in terms of migrating the existing one to the new one, I mean, there's going to be some kind of a break, just like MetaMost had a break when they moved from 0.something to 1.0. But we don't have too much metadata stored in the Firebase backend database. So I can see there's some kind of a conversion process we can do, right? Or maybe run them in parallel, right, and give a way to import this into the new one. You can continue your old, here's a new one, ready to move over, and then your data is housed over in that new environment, and go from there. So I see multiple paths here, Gary. All right.
Yeah. Do you have I mean, I see something of a complete vision in what you've shown today. One thought is, I already, it's influencing how I feel about presenting the social ledger in a trying to market it sort of way, because I feel it's going to change so much that I'm not sure that the confusion factor of trying to get new users experienced with dig commands when those may be unnecessary.
Yeah, not necessary. I mean, I still want them to be there so you can reach into the same data store and extract the same information in say, Mattermost through the dig command. But I want to keep, the new thing for the social ledger too is it's completely standalone. You could actually use that and operate only from within that space and go to these services, right? Go to Mattermost, work there, come back and add what you've learned now to this social ledger thing, right? That's kind of the new pattern here. So the primary interface is in the morning, you open it up, you go to your dashboard, your card-based interface, and you see what's actually happened. Say, what have other teams, groups contributed, what new collectives suddenly came up. And if, assuming they're public, you can drill down into that collective. You can see what services they use. You can see what social objects they created, right? You can completely free to browse around this environment. Provided you have you're authenticated and you have the right access. But to me, this is attractive because you can send anyone into this environment, right? They have no knowledge of what's going on. They can go to the first level and say, okay, there are 3 different collectives. Let me click on that. Let me, turn the card around. You can read about that collective. What's their purpose, right? And you can go down the path and say, okay, let me see what kind of a structure they have, right? You can drill down, you can see immediately, okay, there's some operations pieces, there's some projects they're working on, right? And if they're open to you, then you can drill down and say, okay, let me take a look at the project XYZ, and you can see the whole history of their engagement, right? You could see basically, whoa, they've created documents, they had Zoom sessions, they have conversations in Slack spaces, they have conversations in Discord spaces. You can see all of this because it's completely transparent in terms of what's reflecting their activities in that space. And that to me is a new thing that is harder to see in the current social ledger because these are just other interfaces right now. The dashboard is one way to get to that. The Holonic chart is another way to get to that. But you still work primarily in the dig/dig space, right? And you suddenly break out of this and look at it from a different perspective. So yeah, I just wanted to wrap this up. John, anything else? I mean, you're a good case because you've never worked deeply into the idea of the social ledger. So you have the outsider perspective here. Can you tell us?
Can you hear me? Yes.
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 It's a good set of slides, lots of ideas, lots to think about. What isn't apparent to me at the moment is focus. The focus seems to be on services and function points, where this really is about people, or is it about projects? And that isn't apparent to me just yet. I would imagine people should be the center of the graph database, and their timeline or audit trail should be something that could be followed or monitored by other interested parties, where you would see an aggregate of that as part of your workflow. And in that timeline, you embed Zoom sessions, you embed issues, which then link off to the applications that can serve that. But primarily the focus is about aggregation of events, tasks, and people.
Great point, John. And that's really very important for me to say. This is done by the participants. They control this entire thing. This is no hardwired workflow process. It's not like a Microsoft workflow tool where you have to approve. There's this approval step and there's a second approver, and then this document gets published. That's not the idea of this. This goes back to the original idea of the social ledger, is where you share some of the things you're currently working on. The notion of working out loud, to say, hey, there's some important pieces here that I'm sharing it with my team. Here it is, and I let others know. And then what we've learned in the trial is, well, there are a lot of other people who want to know more about this, right? And they want to be able to set up these kind of environments themselves to get started, right? So it's really like a Kickstarter, Jumpstarter thing. Say, we need to get into, good conversations here, make some sense out of the stuff we're doing. But I don't have the knowledge about the tool sets that we can currently use to do that, right? But it is really driven by the people to say, okay, I'm familiar with this and this tool, and I want to get started very, visual, like video conferencing only, let's say, and have a conversation that way. And then later we can build in other sense-making tools that help us move along faster, right? It's sort of an accelerator here, incubator, like Ben likes to call it, right? So an incubation role of us to say, help other people get up to speed and see what's out there. And not only see the tools, for yourself, but tools that help you collaborate, right? These are tools that work only well if you have multiple people sitting in there, joining conferences, working on documents, creating charts, whatever it is, right? It has to be in a collaborative manner. That's why the people side is so important to me, right? So it's not you, yourself, your ideas, you submit them in the morning and you're gone. No, it's you being an active participant here to say, let's build this, let's co-create this together, right? Let's use the right tools that we're comfortable with as a team, and then see what comes out of all this effort and the activity and time we put into this.
If you still have time, the one thing I was thinking was, you were saying how you want to make this sort of back end and all of this very modular, and I was thinking that it would be sort of nicely fit in with that to make sort of use cases very modular too, and to break them down into complete processes or games of saying, okay, we want to make this tool enable us to do maybe a stand-up system better, so we're focusing only on the stand-up game or something like that, where, okay, by / commands, I can stand up for the day and say what I hope to do, and then maybe that's the entire loop process of that game that we're enabling through the social ledger. So just, I've heard it also called sort of like tea house sequences or something like that, that maybe certain cards in a certain order represent a full and complete game, and then maybe that's a way that we can focus on modularizing the use case level of this and breaking it down into mini projects to enable.
That's super cool, Robert. I love that. The term, the tea house sequence that John Calden is using in his conversation community, right, is great for this. I almost see, like, if you put the right cards in the right order, right, whoa, then magic happens, right? So we just have to figure out this sequence, right? And we're in a position to say, hey, there's some people actually who know these sequences, right? Who know how the magic can happen, right? So let's use that knowledge, embed it into this process, right? And then suddenly, things can happen. That's a great notion. Yeah, thanks, Robert. Okay, let me stop the recording here.
Yes.
Anything else?
You could stop the recording. I was just going to say there is a meeting of the Noob School channel in 30 minutes. Jim's will probably be in Jim's channel. But we could be looking at some of these. There'll be Social Ledger 1.0 issues, I'm afraid. But I may qualify all my discussions of Social Ledger now with, this will all be better in 2.0. But here's what you could do with it now. The dig commands will never go away.
Yeah, they stay. They should be there. Right.
So for people who get into it and decide it does everything they need right now, then they're welcome to it.
That's right.
Good.
Cool. Thanks for that tip, Gary. And thanks everyone for participating. Let me stop the recording.